Hello everyone, welcome to Disability Webinars. Just the usual thing at the beginning where a couple more people are still waiting for them to sign on. Talk you through the technology. I think a few of you did attend a couple of weeks ago in the first webinar that I ran, so this will be a bit more familiar. But for those that are new, if you've never been to a webinar before, you'll notice that you can hear me talking live, but of course you can't actually see a video stream. A lot of people think that's the way that webinars maybe work, and it's more that you actually see what's on my screen at the moment, which is the beginning of my PowerPoint slideshow. So as I flick through the different PowerPoint slides, I'll be able to share with you different parts of my presentation. That's what you'll see throughout. You'll also notice you've got a chat box. I want to say to the right of the screen, but I'm not 100% because it's been a while since I attended one of these. But basically that enables you to ask questions which I may answer in the first 45 minutes or kind of save them until the last 15 minutes where I've allotted time for actual question and answers. So I'll go through the main part of the presentation, and then maybe there'll be questions at the end that you would like to ask. Start off actually, if you all let me know where you're viewing from, just to double check the technology's working and to get you all warmed up. So just type in your chat box which part of the world that you're actually logging in from, and then we can let the other couple of people that are on their way soon attend. So we've got Chris in Cheshire. Hilary says hello. Hello Hilary. Rob in Cambridge. Some dude called Shrin Madapalli in London. Sounds a bit of a strange individual to me. Fran, she's on board. Choo, love it. We've got Kath in Middlesbrough. We've got Suzanne in Northern Ireland. Connor O'Kane in Ireland. So a couple of people just over the water from us. So welcome to the webinar. Hillary's in Warwickshire. I did realise it was you from the Jennifer Trust, Hillary, as well. But thank you for letting us know you're in Warwickshire. It's good. We've got Lee, Laura and Josh from Reading. Catherine in the Wirral. We've got Karen, also from the Jennifer Trust, and she's in the West Midlands. Shrin's declaring his undying love. Okay, so anyway, I think, and Chris is saying an international audience. Absolutely, it's good to hear that the webinars can travel that far. It's all good, all good. And Vic's in Harrow. So I think probably everyone's found the chat box and we're all just about ready. So I think I'll just say settle in and enjoy the ride now, really. Let's kick off with the presentation. So welcome to Disability Webinars. This is webinar number 2, the teenage years. I want to give a quick shout out to Flourish at the top right hand side. You can see the logo Flourish, and they're the amazing guys, a creative agency that have kindly sponsored the webinars and have enabled me to be able to run this to you guys for free. So big thank you to those. Moving on to the next slide. Here we go. So apologies for those that do already know me, and apologies for those that were here 2 weeks ago and you've already seen and heard of this before, but there are 1 or 2 people who are attending for the first time and maybe haven't come across me. So I'll get this ugly mug picture off in a second. But broadly, to introduce myself, I'm Martyn. My personal experiences and what I'm hoping to bring to the series of webinars is that I have SMA, master's degree. I live independently in London, have done for about 4 years now. Someone's suggesting they've seen me on Crime Watch. It was not me with the looting, I must add. It was another random guy in a wheelchair with a mask over their face. It definitely wasn't me in Hackney. Done a bit of world travelling and have a few more general plans in the pipeline, just from a personal side. And then professionally, work experience, which we're going to touch upon a bit later on in this webinar. That was sort of more around university age group, and a little bit younger, and just sort of did a couple of summer placements. But then I worked for nearly 5 years at Scope doing fundraising, training, campaigning and various research projects. Freelance journalism with Disability Now, done some personalisation, so the kind of work on personal budgets and social care with Hackney, and obviously more recently you'd have seen with my blog and constant tweeting, social media and new media. So the present day is that I'm running my own social enterprise, aiming to change the world for disabled people, which I say shamelessly and full of cheese at the same time, using social and new media to do that, and essentially combining all the above. So hopefully there'll be some nuggets of professionalism and probably a little bit more general hilarity on the personal side, but I'm sure you'll be able to take different things away with you from this webinar. So moving on. When you signed up, you'll have seen the outcomes, so hopefully you're all aware of what we're here to discuss today. So just to whiz through your outcomes, which I hope you take away with you, is why being disabled makes this age harder, hear how I personally overcame my teen years, and I've already prepped you on Twitter that there's a pretty dodgy photo of me when I was 14, so watch out for that one. When to use professional advice, support and assistance, how you can still have a great time as a teenager, and why the sky is the limit and the world is your oyster. So I think as much as we'll tackle a couple of the quite hard and difficult issues of those teen years, equally, you know, it's more about saying that everyone has a difficult time and you can get through that, come out the other side and move on to great things. And that's where the diamond theory comes in. So it's a couple of you remember last week I've created a theory that tries to pull together all of the blogs and videos and webinars that I'm running. And hopefully that will explain to you where the teenage years fits into the bigger picture. So for those of you that maybe are on the webinar who I know are a little bit older, the independent living stuff is going to hopefully be more useful to you. But equally, the sort of teen years shows the need for the foundations, and we'll move on to that in a minute anyway. But then we'll look at how the theory applies to the topic of teenage years. We'll consider the barriers that are relevant to you at that age group, find some solutions around education, work experience and socialising, and as I said, there'll be a time for question and answer session at the end. So here is the diamond theory of life goals. The diagram I displayed 2 weeks ago was a bit of a bodged paint job that I'd done myself, and I'm fortunate enough to have a very best mate who's pretty good on the graphic side of thing, and he's been able to make it look a lot more professional and prettier as well. So to explain this theory to you, and then obviously as I said the teenage years will fit into that, when I've been writing all of my blogs and running these webinars, I was trying to sort of find an overarching way of explaining what I'm trying to achieve. So if you look at the picture here, we've got the life stages on the left, starting with parents of a disabled young person, and that was the webinar that I ran 2 weeks ago, and a lot of the parents fed back that it was very helpful. Someone spotted a typo on equipment, thank you for that. I will add this is a work in progress, and this is going back to the graphic designer for a few more tweaks. I've been writing a book that's going to explain all of this properly, and it's going to be a free ebook on my website. So this really is a raw version, but thank you to the keen eye of Vic there on the typo. But as I was saying, so we start with the parents of a disabled young person, and as you go up almost through life stages, you get to the teenage years, then independent living with a slight typo there, and then life fulfillment and adventure. And then I've broken each part of those life stages down into other topics. So when I was presenting to parents of a disabled young person, I was explaining how their child is pretty much unable as a very young person to make big decisions, but the importance was on the parent to do that. And the overall goal is around inclusion, and that would be within social inclusion and education. And we explored all the complexities of being included but having your needs seen to. And then likewise today we're going to be looking at the 3 goals that make up that life stage of the teenage years, which is social inclusion, education and work experience. And so then you'll see that I'm doing a couple on independent living later on, and that's where we can really tackle how difficult it is to have your personal care sorted with social care assessments, and how to get the equipment and transport that you need, and the housing, and obviously the employment which gives you the means to pay for things. And then the whole point of the diamond theory really is to end up with the leisure, adventure, travel and career progression at the top. And you know, I think everyone would agree that you want to be in a job that you enjoy, not just to make money and pay for things, but that you get up and you know your purpose and you enjoy it, and then that you can access leisure and go to the cinema, and that, you know, sometimes you can travel around the world and things like that. So that's broadly where everything I'm working on is sort of coming from. And then the philosophy, as we look down to the left, is how to use it really. It's set aspirational goals, identify the barriers, which we'll also look at what I mean by barriers in a minute, and then grab life. And then the resources down here are the different things that I believe are almost like the tools that people need to actually progress through the diamond really. And this has all come from experiences I've had, but then also during my time working for Scope and other projects as well. And you'll see on the right that relationships runs all the way up, and that's because while it could be near the top of the diamond and it's about maybe being married and that sort of love relationship angle, actually relationships always matter with your friends and your family and your colleagues and professionals such as social workers and physios. So relationships matter all the way throughout life, but equally, you know, there'll be some of the elements we'll touch upon which are around maybe sort of the more sort of dealing with relationships and marriage and that kind of stuff too. So hopefully that explains the diamond theory of life goals in as quick a way as I can without getting away from the teenage years, but this is the structure that it fits into. So as I mentioned, the 3 teenage goals are generally to be included. Overall, this is to be included but appropriately supported in the 3 areas of education. So I would say that's around ideally attending the local school, but having access to physio and swimming. And I'll talk a bit more about my personal experiences of the barriers and the difficulties and the solutions that I found a couple of slides later. But that to me would be a general goal around education in the teenage years, is that you can be with the friends that you live near to, but still obviously, you know, have access to things that relate to your disability. And then work experience, so possibly being in a local business but being able to fully complete your tasks. And then social activities such as going to the cinema or going to a party with your friends. And I think as much as I mentioned some of this, you know, with a younger disabled child towards the parents, and we'll mention it as well later on in the independent living, all these things, you know, probably just as equal. You'd all agree that during the teenage years it is a difficult time, you know, you're sort of coming of age and growing up and you have all those general worries that teenagers do, and the hormones are running wild, and so there's a lot of extra complexities that come as a teenager anyway. And then obviously when you have a disability, there's all the intricacies of how you communicate and relate to your parents, and it's a very complex world. So let's move on and we'll have a look at some of the barriers, which I've sort of hadn't mentioned there, of a couple already, that would be in the way of achieving those 3 goals in those 3 areas. So I've pulled out a sort of definition of a barrier just to give it a bit more context. So a barrier is anything that prevents a person with a disability from participating in all aspects of society because of his or her disability, including an architectural barrier, physical barrier, informational, communications barrier, attitudinal barrier, technological barrier. So the word barrier appears there a lot, but to simplify that really, I would break it into 3 main types of barriers. There's a physical access, so if you can get, say, like a wheelchair into an actual building, if there's ramps or steps or whatever, if the access is suitable. The second is around the attitude of people, and I've written this down later, but the sort of views that people have towards disabled people. And the third barrier is around organisational structures and procedures. So that just gives us a bit of a framework, but what I want to do is get you guys just to spend literally 2 minutes to think about what the barriers would be to accessing the 3 goals, so education, work and social, and literally write just one barrier, but for each of them. So there'll be 3 barriers altogether in the chat box, and just take a minute to think and then write all of the barriers down in one go, and then once they start coming through I'll read them out. So just literally take a minute or 2 to just have a bit of a thought process around what, being a teenager, you know, what the barriers would be to accessing those 3. And I'm just going to take a very quick sip of my water. Okay, we've got a few coming through now, and Catherine, no worries, it's good to have you back. We're just to fill you in, Catherine, we're writing down a barrier that would be in the way of a teenager accessing inclusive education, work and social settings. So all of the audience are now writing down their barriers, which I'm just going to start reading out in a minute, but by all means, you can write down your 3 as well. So starting from the top, we've got quite a few coming in, which is good. Where are we? So Rob has said in education, proving assistance like a dictaphone at school would make all the difference, proving you are not lazy. Kath has said with work, it's about attitude, sort of how will they do that. Rob has put about work, you have to prove you're as good if not better than someone else, almost hide what your disability is like. Hillary's put the physical environment, transport and attitudes. Kath put within social, personal care is a big deal, such as going to the toilet. Karen, school on several levels, school on several levels and floors, doors not wide enough, not enough wheelchair spaces at cinema. Rob put social, toilets again, yeah, that's come up a couple of times. Education, this is from Suzanne, getting the 24-hour care package for uni. Work, physical barriers. Social, the care to enable us to go out without help from parents. And I think that is actually something that when I sort of do a little talk through of my experience of that period of life, that definitely comes up, is that sort of balance. Trish is saying about how with pubs and clubs, it's often when friends and bouncers are able to help lift chairs up as much as if there's not total access. So that's a good point. Alan saying about the attitude of peers. Again, that comes up later, but that's very, very important, definitely. Vic said about attitudinal barriers, people thinking that disabled people don't have the same hopes and fears, that our lives are completely different to normal. Laura's put personal care at work, accessible building for youth clubs. Salvador, a physical barrier for all 3, I would say, would be access for building, as without that you can't learn, work or go to party. Transportation and toilets. This is hi Martin, so hello Sal, how are you? Catherine, education, she put architectural inaccessible buildings, work, proving disability doesn't hold you back, and social, being attitude and being included. And Rob's put social, being patronised, discriminated against, verbal abuse. So that's really, really good actually. There's a lot of different things you've all come up with. So I'm going to press back on with the slides. And then these are, as I said, I break it down into 3 areas, and this uses the social model theory that I've used at work for quite a while now, where I mentioned it's the physical access, the attitudinal barriers and the procedures. And then these are the sort of ideas that I had come up with really, just sort of brainstorming myself about things that did do and probably or definitely still do have a massive impact on accessing all 3 of those areas. So as you can see on the physical, we've got buildings, we've got toilet facilities, having additional space for physio. I remember at school when primary this was, that I used to use the staff room to do my physiotherapy session. Unable to access the table or desk as well, so I used to stand up in calipers and have a big block that sat on top of the table, so I was still able to be with my peers, but then actually the block enabled me to still handwrite and do my work while I was stood up. Attitudes, so whether it's school, business or public venues, if they have negative views on disability, and often they'll try and blame health and safety and say it's too risky, too difficult. Individual staff members, so if a particular teacher or a particular person you work with just has a funny attitude, that's going to be a barrier. And as Alan mentioned, peers as well, that's another big part throughout all of this. And then on the procedural side, sometimes health and safety will be an issue, genuinely, not used as an excuse. Employment application methods, so for example, if there's a test centre for a job, that they're more inclusive and understanding if someone maybe would need more time to actually take the test, for example, and then allowing a bit more time. So having more inclusive methods when you're employing people, that procedure would be more open to disabled people. And of course funding personal support, which comes back to the sort of having the care package and personal assistance and everything that entails. And as I mentioned, some of the later webinars I do will go into a lot more detail on things like care and travel and things like that. But obviously we're homing in at the moment on those teenage years. And I think those three areas, physical, attitudinal and procedural, sort of outline the broad barriers. And then at the bottom you can see that I've put a kind of fourth one, which is self-perception. And we'll come back to the resources on the diamond theory, but a massive part of having the right resources to move forward is that self-perception is a worry that everyone may have, but it's all about confidence and positivity. But I think we'd all agree the teenage years are harder to instill that kind of can-do and positivity all the time when the hormones are running wild and there's so much else going on. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that there's the usual worries and then the disability specific. So, one general teenage worry would just be, oh, I've got maybe some spots on my face and I'm worried how all my friends think I look because I've got spots on me. Whereas disability specific would be, like we've touched upon, about how can I go to the toilet and things like that, which your non-disabled friends probably wouldn't understand. And so that's really hard to then know how to deal with that as a young person, and also to know who to talk to about that. So here we are. I've warned you, there was a pretty hilarious photo of me. I took this on my phone. It was in a photo album my auntie made for me for a birthday years ago. So you can see that's in 1997 when I was 14. Trish is right in R. Trish is my mum, by the way. So basically, in terms of, I wanted to go through and share some of the different elements that I've learned from that period of time. So starting with school, and as I said, using some of the resources of the diamond theory. My secondary school, when I was a teenager, I couldn't go to the local one. So in terms of that goal of, being included, I had to make a call on it that I wasn't actually able to attend the local school. It wasn't going to give me enough support. I didn't have the right access. So I went on a bus that had all wheelchair access with 3 or 4 other students, and went off about half an hour journey to another school. And Fran, who is on the webinar at the moment, we both went to Impington together. And basically there was a unit that provided the support that you needed. So looking down those resources, there was the right people there, such as physios and learning support assistants. There was the right technology in terms of hoists and standing frames and all that kind of thing. So I was absolutely supported with my disability to the extent I needed. But then also it was an included school. It wasn't just disabled people. So when I was in my actual classes, most of my peers weren't disabled. And I think, looking back in hindsight, it was the right balance, because I didn't feel, isolated. And I could talk to other students that had disabilities as well. But then equally you were, very much included in the everyday environment of the school. I think the mindset under the resources there, I don't recollect, sort of if I did feel overly confident or positive or never give up attitude. And with the knowledge, I'm not sure if I would have understood the barriers and even the solutions. I think a lot of that was driven from my parents, but I can definitely remember having a lot of fretful moments, not wanting to go on the bus all the way far away to this school early on, and it was never always plain sailing. But the fact of the matter is I stuck at it. I never give up, as it said there. And in the end was able to move on and get my GCSEs and A-levels and go to university. And so when you look at the diamond picture, then that was very, very positive because I was able to progress through to higher education and into employment. So while it was never plain sailing, it was quite difficult. It was definitely worth, the effort and sometimes the difficult stress of sticking at school and education with some of the additional, hurdles and barriers that, as you all know, on the other end of the webinar, had to go through. The last thing to mention there is the funding, which is obviously for some of the people, so such as a learning support assistant has to be funded to be able to help you at school, and obviously technology such as wheelchairs and stand-in frames. So all of that has to be, funded in some way, and that would tie back in with knowledge and people and talking to your social worker and talking to the school and almost joining all the different dots up. So as long as you know that the overall ideal is that you can be as included as possible, but having your needs seen to, then it's sort of up to you to individually join the different dots and, make the most appropriate solution for yourself. But from my side, I'd say that was, broadly how my school years during the teen years looked. And as you can see, I had a terrible fringe and crazy buck teeth. So, it was even harder because of that as well, and that wasn't even disability related. So we're going to move on now to things I learned, if I can get it to click. So the things I learned socially. There's a picture on the top left with me and my sister playing the piano at my grandparents', I believe. I think that was quite soon after I'd had spinal fusion, and when I was putting the contents together actually for this, I spoke to one of the physios from Hammersmith Hospital, and she was quite keen that I should mention the spinal fusion because for a lot of disabled people with a similar disability that can happen, and that was a very, very difficult time. As a bit tangential to socially, but it's worth mentioning that for a year I was laid up with the titanium rods having been put in my back and struggling to be up all day in my chair. So that was definitely a barrier, but nonetheless it made my breathing and my health better in the long run, and I'm in better stead for having had that operation as well. And also we can touch on any questions you might have at the end, and of course you can always get in contact with me afterwards if you want a more personal chat about any of these issues. But in terms of socially, I think I always remember feeling a bit left out because I was not at the local school. Sorry, we've got some sirens going past again, but it's just London sirens, not looting sirens, so we're all safe. But yeah, I think because my original friends lived locally, but I didn't go to school with them, and the school I went to obviously didn't live near to those people, then I felt a bit trapped in the middle. And I think however much I did socially, I had doubts that I wasn't, doing enough or included enough. But in hindsight, I look back and, I had lunch with a lot of good friends, and I was able after school, maybe once a week to catch up with a couple of mates and had the odd sleepover. And that was always, facilitated because my friends' parents were very understanding about my disability as well. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat now. But yeah, I think later on in my teen years as well, when I wanted to do things like clubbing, my mum, bless her, she would drive out in our clapped out old Renault Traffic, which was a B-Reg, really old car, and turn up at 2 in the morning in her pyjamas. And yeah, basically, would sort of come and collect me from a nightclub. So when I was 18, 19, I was still able to go clubbing with my friends as well. And I think probably talking through all of this, you can see the importance of people, i.e. good friends and good family around you, and relationships, which I mentioned on the diamond as well, that, having good relationships with all those people is going to enable you to live a very included social life. But equally, I had to learn that I did need more support, and I couldn't always do everything, and it wasn't fair to expect my mum and dad to put me to bed at 2 o'clock every other night and go too crazy. And I know mum will vouch that there were times I had the teenage strops and almost wanted to be a bit naughty and rebellious, but I suppose I was wary of being too rebellious because I knew that I would still need help at the end of the day. So there's a lot of complex, emotional sides to it as well. But as I say, broadly, the social side was all good, and I got to do lots of nice things looking back. So I think it is possible and doable. It just takes a bit of compromise and thinking through. So the third goal that we looked at was around work. Now, I didn't do work experience in year 10 because of my spinal fusion. By the way, that picture's not when I was a teenager, that's more recent, but I couldn't find any work-related pictures from over 10 years ago, so you can just have a posy one. That's exactly where I'm sat at the moment, talking to you right by my fridge. But yeah, basically with work, and Rob mentioned this on one of the questions earlier on, was, there's a lot of thoughts from an individual, that kind of self-perception, that are they going to be able to work, and even if they're able, what will other people think of it as well. But on the flip side, there are going to unfortunately be some employers that are a bit unsure and wary of employing disabled people. So it's sort of going into it again with that. The goal is to find work and work experience or employment maybe in later teens. What is it that you want to do as an individual? Forget your disability. What job is it you want to do? But then in doing that, what are the additional barriers that come up because of your disability? So we come back to the barriers and we look at physical, attitudinal and procedural. And then it's just gradually using the resources that I've got up here again to find the solutions and overcome it. So for me, I think I was 19 or 20, I was at uni and I wanted to get some work experience under my belt. And I went round my local town centre in St Ives and literally just dropped into a load of random places, such as, well, in St Ives it's basically hairdressers and restaurants, but there was a couple of estate agents and I ended up dropping in one of them, and the manager was really cool and happy to talk about it, and we devised a strategy where I put a few hours in a week voluntarily and I worked more on the computer because I struggled to do filing and sending letters and post and that sort of thing. So I was actually able to go to work without any form of personal assistant because I'm fine on a computer on my own anyway. And yeah, I got to know the people that worked there. I got to understand some of the beginning of the world of work, which obviously put me in good stead for later years when, I started applying for jobs properly. And it was another really good part of my sort of, progression and, moving that part of my life forward. Obviously, I can, talk a lot more about work recently, but I think, that will come later, and applying it to the teenage years, it is just about when it's difficult to work in a bar or stack shelves at Tesco's when you're in a wheelchair. The kind of work experience you want has to be much more, I would guess, depending on your disability, but certainly from a wheelchair user perspective, something more desk-based, and that can be harder to find work experience for. But I'd always just say, be confident, be positive, never give up, find the right information and solutions, talk to the right people, if necessary, get new technology in, so it might be a portable ramp into a building, or it might be software on a computer that enables you to speak into a microphone like Dragon Dictate so you can type quicker. And obviously with the funding, there are funding streams that can help. And just to come back to people, like, it's not just, as I mentioned earlier, friends, family, peers, people is that very much professionals. So for me, it was often calling in with the great guys at the Jennifer Trust and just asking specific questions around, factors to do with my disability. And there's social workers and all sorts of other professionals. So only you will know when that time is right to go to those people. But they are there, they are full of knowledge, they can easily help you, but you have to step forward and want to find out that information to be able to join up the dots and overcome them in the long run. So moving on, we're sort of starting to wrap up the presentation, so you can start thinking about a few questions in a minute. But as I've been saying, really, that the teenage years are the perfect foundations to be able to move on. And as we'll find out next for 2 weeks' time, the transition phase from childhood to adulthood, does have its own difficulties within social services and, within other sort of factors around housing and employment. But, you know, if you've managed to be as included as possible socially, then you're going to have the soft skills of people interaction and a good network of friends and be a generally happy person. And if you've been included in education, then you'd be getting the right level of education as well. Then obviously you can go on to university and go on to get good jobs and all the rest of it. And like we just mentioned, by having work experience, it also gives your CV a bit more of a roundedness and even more, you know, better chance of moving on and doing so well when you become an adult and go into independent living. So I'd say it's the perfect foundations to move through those life goals and up the diamond. So what we have covered. We've covered the diamond theory, and I hope it wasn't too much of a whistle-stop tour, but I didn't want to dwell the whole time on just the theory. So then we applied it to this topic of the teenage years. We considered the barriers that were relevant to you, so that was where we looked through the different physical, attitudinal, and procedural, and we applied it to social, education and work, and you came up with all of your own barriers that you perceived to be in the way. And then hopefully through my talking about my personal experiences, which is hard to summarise the 7 years of being a teenager into 10 minutes, but hopefully there was some helpful, you know, things that I talked about or maybe made you think about other solutions that apply to you as well. So yeah, hopefully it's sort of been a thought-provoking 40 minutes. And now we've got 20 minutes to do question and answers. So as I said, if you have any specific questions about your situation that I can maybe help, then fire away. And equally, maybe if I skipped over something or I haven't mentioned something or I didn't explain it very well, then take this opportunity to probe me a bit more, and, you know, I can try and express those sentiments a bit better. Okay, let's open my question box. So what was the hardest thing for you growing up? That's a good question, that is. It's hard to define it as one thing that was hard growing up, but I think talking about the teen years specifically, it is that trying to understand, you know, your kind of self-identity and get through all the different parts of life that everyone does, but there definitely was a lot more added complexities due to being disabled. And one of them being that when the hormones are running wild and you're having a bad day and you just want to sort of go off in your room and slam a door, everything like that, it's, you know, a bit more difficult to do that with a disability, and you don't want to rock the apple cart too much with those that help look after you and everything as well. So yeah, I'd say it was the sort of complexities of being disabled and managing the relationships of those close to you. And while you know that your parents love you unconditionally, I'm sure that everyone knows there are certain lines that you still shouldn't cross, disabled or not. I mean, I remember once, actually, probably more recently, but going out clubbing with a load of friends, and I'd said I was going out for one drink and I'd be home about 10 o'clock. And then I got in at 2 o'clock and my mum just looked at me and said, you know, if it wasn't 0 degrees and you were susceptible to chest infections and, you know, sort of would have to just sit in the wheelchair for the rest of the night, I would leave you out there. But obviously, you know, she wasn't going to let her son sit out in the wheelchair and get a chest infection. But we had some very interesting moments over the years. So Catherine has said, did disability factors such as fatigue stop you from socialising? I'd say definitely more recently, but then I'm 28 on Saturday, so maybe that's not disability, that might be an age thing. But yeah, certainly in the middle of the winter, I just mentioned I get bad chest infections. So I think a massive, you know, worry is that I get a chest infection and it can lead to quite nasty places. So I probably would not go out as much in the winter because I would be more tired and the cold would affect me more. So yeah, I think in a kind of health sense, maybe a little bit more than fatigue, but it's sort of all kind of one and the same. And I'd always say, you know, live life to the full and never ever let your disability stop you from living the life you want. But obviously, there are practicalities. I'm never going to run the 100 meters in 10 seconds, or I'm never going to run the 100 meters, and that's something I had to accept. And equally, yeah, fatigue or ill health may be something that is a big factor. So I think you've always got to be wary of those elements as well. Salvador, did you have to deal with bullying in school? How did you cope and respond to your bullies? It's a really good question. I think on the whole I was very lucky because I was sort of quite outgoing and I got on with most of the people. So even if there was one or two pupils that maybe had a tendency to be a bit of a bully towards me, they wouldn't get away with it because I had too many other friends that would back me up, which also, think of it broadly, comes back to my earlier point about having peer support and good relationships with those around you. But I'm sure there's always been one or two times that people have called me a name or been a bit nasty, and I think it was a balance for standing up for yourself and saying, hang on a second, just because I'm in a chair doesn't mean that you can treat me like that, but then also I think probably if the bullying is a bit out of order and distasteful and that it's not going to stop, then nothing would, I would not go to the teachers, even if at that age you don't want to be a telltale tit. Equally, I think sometimes it's the best thing to snuff it out and just say to your teacher, look, this is going on, it's not very good, this is how it's making me feel, and the teachers are well trained to deal with those other students in a way that can be solved without it causing you more problem in the long run. That's my personal view on that one. Suzanne said, did you have any trouble getting your care package for uni? I only have 3 weeks before I start and still haven't been confirmed my care package and equipment. Because I think when I went to university, I stayed on the funding of my local council in Cambridgeshire. So even though I was in Coventry, I was still funded from Cambridgeshire. And about a year before I went away, because I was 19 in the September I went to uni, so I moved from children's to adults a year earlier. So they basically set my adult care package up so that it would support me 24/7, even though prior to that it was much more my family and the odd hour with a care agency. It wasn't 24/7. So then when I actually went to Coventry, it was already in place and set up. So I don't know from your point of view, Suzanne, if you're changing authorities or if you're trying to up the hours with the authority you live in or whatever. But I tell you what, Suzanne, I was going to offer this anyway, a couple of Skype calls with people if they wanted to have a bit more of a one-on-one chat. We can have a webcam chat or a Facebook type-in chat. So let's catch up in the next couple of days, Suzanne, and I can help you out a little bit more with the details on that. But in terms of, when I went to uni, it was set up about a year beforehand. So we'll pick that up. And there are, I think, if I just have a quick look, I think my details are on the next page. There we go. So if any of you want to email me, or obviously there's my blog and the magazine that I run with Shrin and various other mediums of communication. But if you want to get in contact after, these are the details by which to do so. So let's pick that up another time, Suzanne. On to the next question. Did you feel like you could talk to your parents about personal issues, example, relationships and body changes? Very, for those who know me, they'll know I'm very, very close with my parents to this day, and I can talk about everything and anything. And I think that's been a big, powerful part of why I've been able to get out there and do so much. And certainly when I was wondering, if a girl would ever love me and accept, the fact I'm disabled, and when my body was going through some funny changes, I definitely remember talking to my mum and dad about what it all meant, and obviously the additional parts, on the whole sort of disability side as well. But that's difficult. That is really difficult, when any teenager realizes their body's changing, or they have worries about, if someone's going to accept them and love them for who they are. it's a difficult period of time. But I think, you know, when you have a disability, there are people that might sort of not be able to overcome that. But equally, it comes back to the thing we mentioned earlier of self-perception, that if you are comfortable with how you are and who you are, then there'll always be someone that will accept you. But it's hard to see the logic and rationale in that, I think, at that age. So Vic put, it sucks not to be able to rebel. Yeah, absolutely. When you want to just kick off and slam a door and just let a bit of frustration out, and you're not able to because of your physical challenges, then, you know, sometimes you do want to rebel. Having said that, I think soon after my mum and dad divorced, when I was about 10 years old, I suddenly got it in my head that I wanted to go and get my ear pierced, of all things. So my mum and dad were adamantly against it, and we went down the local town, and this was with my best mate Billy. Went down and walked into, I drove my chair, but you know what I mean, walked into the ear piercing shop, and they said, oh no, you're not allowed to have your ear pierced, it's you've got to have adult consent. So me and Billy went round the corner, you know, we're 10 years old at this point, and I said, let's go and buy a pad of paper and a pen, and we'll just jot down a pretend note of consent. So we walked back in, and I think they probably knew that we were up to no good, but they saw the letter and accepted it. They pierced my ear, and then later that night my dad went crazy and decided it had to come out immediately, but couldn't do it with his fingers. I don't know if this was for effect, but he got out a pair of pliers and then basically pulled the back of the earring off. So, you know, even though I have minimal movement and I'm in a wheelchair, I still did manage to rebel on the odd occasion. I think that's probably one thing I didn't put in the presentation, is that, you know, I think a little bit of rebellion is always good because it's a way of almost communicating or expressing yourself, but I'm not condoning anyone to get their ear pierced or write pretend letters from their parents. But I hope that's just a real life experience of something I went through that is of interest, if not just a bit naughty. So Karen put, my experience of working, the questions are coming in thick and fast now. My experience of working with disabled teenagers always highlighted the struggles of attaining meaningful or not so meaningful relationships with the opposite or same sex. Any thoughts? Yeah, because I'd probably say that that's actually the case for everyone and anyone. But I think, as I've mentioned, that with a disability, internally you have more worries and concerns and tussles. So, for example, I need to be turned over at night. I call my PAs and they come in and roll me and get me comfortable. So an additional aspect to this would have been how I, you know, when I had my first girlfriend at uni, that actually, you know, would she mind doing those things for me, and would that be a barrier, coming back to earlier what we talked about, towards my having a relationship. But the positive was that, you know, I met a lovely girl at uni, we were together for 3 years during that time, and she totally embraced all of that. So while I can imagine a lot of teenagers do express that who are disabled, I also think a context of it is that actually it's no different to any teenager. It's just got a few additional, you know, sort of aspects to it as well. Where are we? So I'm just going through all the questions at the moment. So Alan put, living in a rural area, public transport is not available, let alone accessible transport. This issue would prevent any disabled person getting out and about. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things, and Rob, who's on this webinar, is going through the motions of applying to Motability, and I'm quite keen to have a chat with him on a video interview and get it up on my blog to share the sort of way of driving yourself. And I don't know if you remember seeing on my slides, I didn't point it out as obviously, but on the right here it says, it's a newspaper cutting from 2002, Teenagers Fund reaches £12,000, and that was where a lot of local fundraising took place to help me to pay the upfront amount of money towards my Motability car, which I then went on to get, and that then meant that I was able to learn to drive in my personal, very highly adapted car. Having learned to drive, I took the test, and I've been driving now God, about 8-9 years, and it's an absolute lifeline because even in London, where in theory the transport's better, only a third of the tubes are actually accessible, and the buses can be a nightmare, especially in rush hour. So actually, transport is an issue for disabled people, across the board really. And I would say one of the biggest answers, if possible, for those in the UK is to, take advantage of the Motability scheme. So that would be my general thought around transport. But I agree, especially in rural areas, it's difficult the best of times. And I know living in St Ives, Cambridgeshire, they've only just started to get accessible buses in now. So that is a very, very tricky one. So yeah, just Suzanne put that would be great with a big smiley face and a thank you. So as I said, we'll have a chat on Skype about your care stuff. David put, were you always confident? And what would you say to people who perhaps don't have confidence? Would you say have swagger? I'm not sure I'd say exactly in those lines you should have swagger, but I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because, there are certain elements of people that are, that the personality trait that's more ingrained in them, nature or nurture, but I don't know how easy it is to learn. But I'd say I personally have almost learned to be outgoing and positive because that's what's enabled me to overcome a lot of the barriers in the way. So yeah, I think I would always encourage people to try and be more confident, but often people who are less confident and talk about their disability, it's because they're maybe not totally at ease with how their disability is and what other people would think of them. So, it's maybe around a bit of a sort of looking at why it is they're not confident and seeing if it does relate to disability to snuff that out, because there's no need for that. But then if it's because they're just a shy person anyway, then, I'd never want someone to change. So it's kind of a balance between the two. But I wouldn't say I've always felt confident, even if I come across confident. Even like, tonight, before I came and delivered this to you guys, I was feeling quite nervous and apprehensive. So we all have nerves and, shyness, and we're not always confident. And it's sometimes how you deal with it. But I wouldn't say I'm always just buzzing and, feeling like everything's easy. There's been a lot of difficult times as well. So Laura said, what did you do when you left school after GCSEs? Where did you go to college? Well, luckily Impington. So although I said the first 2 years were horrific, and between you, me, the gatepost and the other quite a few people on the webinar now, I actually used to be quite sick in the mornings on my way to school because whenever I get nervous, I get a really upset tummy. And in year 7 or 8, I just hated it. I just didn't want to be going all that distance. So early doors, it wasn't very pleasant. However, once I'd settled into Impington, made new friends, got used to the journey and all of that stuff, they actually had a sixth form college there. So even though I looked at some other colleges, it was easier just to stay in Impington with all of the support. And it was similar at uni because I did a master's and I was looking to maybe move universities, and I thought, I've got my flat, I've got my care, I know where I'm at. So I ended up just, staying in Coventry, and likewise GCSEs to A-levels, I stayed at the same college. But obviously there was a transition after A-levels to university. And yeah, if you ever want to talk about some of the things that Josh might do when he gets to that point, you can always give me a shout anyway. So Rob, did you ever deal with any employment setbacks? How did you overcome them? I mean, again, I was quite lucky that I saw the job at Scope a month before I finished my master's and basically applied, had an interview, got the job, and then as a lot of you will know, I did a year in St Ives for Scope and then moved to the head office in London, did a few more years, and now I'm self-employed. So it's been working for Scope and now myself has all been quite positive. Maybe back in the work experience days, I was less aware and confident of what I was doing, but I wouldn't really say setbacks. I think you just learn as you go how to plan, like if there's a meeting or a training session or a work meeting away from the office, all of the things, it comes back to transport, equipment, people, all the resources. that are in the Diamond Theory, it always comes back to those things, really. So in the end, I think you learn to preempt what would be a setback by solving it before it happens, but that's all, learned, really. Trish put, did you ever have time in your teenage years that you felt you were a lot different to your friends? If so, how did you deal with it? I'm sure I would have had some quite, sad days. Maybe if it, like with football, for example, I always wanted to, as any kid would go up and play for England. I was going to say play for Tottenham, but not everyone would want to do that. But I'm a Tottenham fan. So those sort of moments were quite sad. But yeah, I think, it's one of those that, again, like everyone goes through. You have your down days and your sad days, and I probably would have had the odd cry, and I probably would talk to my parents or my friends about how I felt, and in time it would have come good. Salvador, how do I download your slides? If you email me, I've got your email address. Once you've emailed, I'll send you the slides, and likewise everyone else. Yeah, if you want a copy of the slides, just let me know. Kath, it was great going to uni. You could then stay out till 5 a.m. every night if you want to. Exactly. It was that having tussled with sort of not upsetting my mum until I was 18, 19, quite rightly. Suddenly I had PAs who were employed to enable me to do what I wanted to do. And so there was less of an emotional conundrum once I was at that age. And definitely I used to go out till all hours and go crazy, and had a really good side. Just looking through the questions. Vic put, I rebelled by losing my dad's side parting. I'm not sure what. Do you want to clarify that, Vic? South put, I got my eyebrow pierced for rebellion purposes. It backfired as Mum just looked at me and laughed when I got home. So obviously that's going back to when I was talking about my little thing earlier. I'm just catching up on the questions. Rob, did you ever feel your parents were overprotective? And he feels that he's and they're afraid to let him be normal. You hear that a lot. I think, well, I don't know if any of you heard, without name dropping now, but I did the interview with my mum for Radio 4, and that was about the difficulties for a parent when their disabled child leaves home. It's still on iPlayer. It's called Caring Too Much. And yes, I mean, I think Mum would agree that that was the most difficult thing she did, or one of the most difficult things she had to do, to let me go after 19 years of doing all of my care, etc. So yeah, I think there was sometimes that, but maybe up until I left, she wasn't overprotective. I think my parents were a big part of why I got out there and did it. It was only when I suddenly was travelling around the world and wanting to move to London and stuff, then, that sort of, for me, I think, worked out in a positive sense. But maybe if you feel your parents are being a bit overprotective, you need to have a bit of a, explain to them how it makes you feel at the age you're at, and the hopes and dreams that you have, and what that might entail in the future. It'd be worth sort of speaking to them. Just going through. Cass said, I asked my consultant as a teenager how I was going to be able to have sex, as I had hip contractures. What did your consultant say? I don't know if you want to share that one with us, Kath, but that's quite interesting. Brilliant. So yeah, Rob has said he's happy to tell anyone about his Motability experience, and he's on Twitter as @GingerRob. So GingerRob. Trish, do you feel having good support from your family and friends has made you the person you are now? Yep, absolutely, without a doubt. Obviously I've in more recent years taken that on from my own ways, that I've travelled alone, I've moved to London independently, I work for myself, so I now am very much, independent in that way. But without a doubt, and that's what I was stressing 2 weeks ago for the parents, was that for a parent to instill that positivity and support and solutions-based approach, then the child can and will thrive, and do very well. Rob says, at any point did you become angry about your disability? Teens go through an angry phase anyway, but did you ever blame people? yeah, I think there's a tendency to get a bit of a chip on one shoulder and feel the world's against you. And like I said before, that in itself is already an everyday occurrence for a teenager. But when you have a disability, it's all too easy to then feel that you really have the world against you, because not only have you got hormones running wild and things are a little bit difficult, but then you've also got your wheelchair or your other impairment, whatever that may be. So absolutely, I think, there's a time where you do blame people and feel quite upset. So I'm just having a sip of water because my voice is going. So Kath was just saying about how you can take your washing home and then your mum still feels needed. Yep, I still do that. Not just to make her feel needed, but it's also good just to take the washing home as well. Okay, so Vic's rebellious thing was that he decided not to have the same hairdo as his dad. Crazy rebel. You are off the hook, Vic, you crazy mofo. So Karen said, I took a couple of young people to have tattoos, although they were over 18. I was so worried that the parents would flip out. However, the parents' response was amazing. They thanked me for treating them like their age rather than wrapping them up in cotton wool. That is really refreshing to hear, because I do know people, as others have insinuated, that may not have had that reaction, but that is so good that a parent can respect the fact their child is over 18 and can and should make their own decisions. And I think, again, that's something I said to the parents 2 weeks ago, that, disabled people should make mistakes. We should try things that fail. We should sometimes hurt ourselves physically, like when I was playing with my toy kitchen at the age of 4 and I fell off the sofa and broke my leg. I learned not to play with toy kitchens, and that is valuable life experience that you don't get if you're wrapped in cotton wool. So, I think that's another part, is being able to make mistakes, but, live with your consequences. Kath said, he said they will find a way. That's referring to our consultant hip tightness conversation. And Vic, I'm not even going to read out not even going to read out what Vic's put in now. Alan has said to Rob that his Twitter is @AlanRoyGBIV. So that's ALANROYGBIV. So Rob said, how do you manage on long flights? I had to go for a fitting of a sort of condom with tube attached to a bag once. Most embarrassing. Yep, I use a bag exactly like that, and that's probably something I'll touch upon, if not in independent living, but in the travel webinars, because obviously that's around flying as well. But yeah, basically I agree with your question that long flights are difficult to nip to the loo, and there are contraptions that you can use. And you have to admit, Rob, and I do too, we're lucky as men because we're able to use bottles and bags, whereas I'm sure some of the girls will know it's a lot trickier. Helly's just apologising for the lateness, had network problems. Just a quick question from her. As a teenager with a disability, if any females want to chat, then I'm on Twitter too. Okay, that's good. This is quite nice, because I was always wary that with the webinars, we're not all in one room and it's hard for you guys to interact with each other. But if you all want to connect with the other people that are here, then let me know, and we can find a way of doing that. But for now, Helly's Twitter handle is @Helly, HELLY, Copeland, COPELAND. So for any of the female teenagers out there that maybe want to chat to another girl, then Helly is available. And she's saying that her rebellion was playing cricket with her leg splints. It felt pretty good. Okay, so I think we're getting near the end now. There's a couple of people heading off. I know we've overrun, but I think it was important to get through your questions. And also Vic pointed out, and I was thinking the same thing, that the questions are hopefully the most valuable part for you guys to really discuss things that matter to you, and for me to try and help out where I can. Karen's saying about that any young people can get in touch with the Jennifer Trust, and the email is youngpeople@jtsma.org.uk if they need support and information, etc. Also, you can go to the JTSMA website, which is jtsma.org.uk, or Google JTSMA. For those who don't know, the JTSMA is around, it's the Jennifer Trust for Spinal Muscular Atrophy, and I and a couple of the other guys I know that are on this webinar, we all have SMA, Spinal Muscular Atrophy. So they're the guys that are great for support for SMA, but I'm sure we'll be happy to help anyone that wants to. Yeah, Rob's asking for the Twitter handles. I'm going to go back through. In fact, I've got a questionnaire that I'd love you to all fill out. So tomorrow I'll send you a big thank you email for all your time, and I'll send you some of the bits and bobs there as well. Okay, so Fran said the same. So yep, I'll add yours in, Fran. No problems. That is, I'm at the end of the question box. We're only 8 minutes over, and before all of you sign off and everything, I'll wrap the presentation up. If you have any other questions, email me, tweet me. As I said, if you have any longer aspects to talk about, we can have a Skype chat as well. I'm always available to chat about these things. So I hope you found it enjoyable. And also, don't forget to sign up for the next one in 2 weeks' time on independent living. So hopefully that will be just as valuable as the one on the teenage years were today. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.